Do you consider yourself a death doula? Is that a thing?
A death doula is a thing. I actually named my ministry the Death and Resurrection Doula because Christians that are doing this work are very different than the non-Christians doing this work.
Welcome back to If I'm Really Honest, where I seek truth without tribalism. It's a place where ignorance isn't punished, curiosity is rewarded, and conflict doesn't mean contempt. I've been trying a stoic experiment recently where my morning alarm is labeled Imagine the Worst. And that's what I do first thing every morning. I close my eyes and imagine losing everything one at a time. I didn't wake up in this bed, but on a busy sidewalk. I've recently lost my job. My wife is cheating on me, and she took the kids. I'm sick, probably with COVID or something, and I have no one to call because my friends and my family have all disowned me. Obviously, some parts are easier to imagine than others. One of the things I've learned is that no matter how bad life is, it could always get worse. For example, for some reason in my imaginary scenario, I've never lost any of my limbs. I've also never taken away any of my five senses, even though that's just normal life for tens of millions of happy, productive people living fulfilling lives. And they're doing that despite having handicaps that have just been too outrageous for me to even consider. As it turns out, imagining the worst is actually pretty difficult. The worst can always get worse, infinitely so. And since it could always be infinitely worse, that means there's always an infinite number of things to be grateful for, which is exactly what I realize each morning when I give those things back to myself one at a time. I experience the joy of getting a job, exiting bankruptcy, finding a house, reuniting with my wife and kids, and regaining my health and mobility. I'm not sure if it's a practice that I'll continue, but for an overanalyzer and catastrophizer like me, it seems to be helping for now. Something I've learned from this is a greater appreciation for deep contemplation intentionally of really dark things. If you're not in a good place right now to think about death and unaliving, maybe skip this episode, because today I'm joined by Laurel Nicholson. She's a Christian death doula who deals openly with everything related to death. This conversation went in some unexpected places, and hopefully, once again, I've brought you someone that you don't fully agree with. You've brought yourself, and if you're a fan of what we do around here, you know that you already disagree with yourself more than is comfortable to admit. This whole thing actually connects to my upcoming video on the Christian's Guide to Suicide. The topic, not an instructional video, although there's a little bit of how not to in there too. It's complicated. Make sure you're subscribed so you get notified when that one's released. But now I give you Laurel Nicholson. Where I'm coming from is I was told when I was growing up that if I committed suicide, I would go to hell. You are a Christian death doula, and those two things don't go together for me. Do you run into people like me? And what's your perspective on that whole thing?
Well, there was a woman right before I became a death doula. She was in her 70s, had MS, didn't get out much, lived alone, and says she had autism. And so she called herself having the unholy triad. And I believe it was physical pain, being alone, and there was one other, and I think it was something to do with her thoughts, sort of just like spiritual misery. And she was out one day, which was rare, and she fell and never left her house again. So things began to close in on her. And she would say to me often, I think I'm going to kill myself. And we had a rotation of people who go over and visit her. She was considered homebound. So she was on our pastoral care list, and we would go over. And there was one man who was deeply Catholic, although this was an Episcopal church. And he told her that if she committed suicide, she would go to hell. So then it was my turn to go over. And I was like, well, I don't have that same theology. I guess maybe it's okay to say the alternate theology on that would be justification by faith through grace. So her faith in Christ, which she had, saves her beyond suicide. So that's how I personally see it. And medical aid in dying is a really big conversation right now. A lot of states are passing that legislature. And one of the things that makes it reasonable to people is that they've totally wiped out that it's suicide. It's not suicide if you're actually dying. And that's sitting well in people's psyches, and they're supporting the medical aid in dying legislature. They're talking with, other, like, death doulas are beginning to get very involved in that. Personally, I'm not. But regardless, I think if we take this biblical concept, we're justified by faith through grace. Christ has justified us by his death. So, like, if I commit suicide, does that negate what Christ has done for me? Martin Luther is 16th century reformer, and just came across this the other day because I know someone who lost someone to suicide, and they were telling me about it. And Luther said, it's the illness, it's the mental illness that takes that person. So, there's a lot of different ways to look at it. So in summary, there are Christians, I think, who would believe that, yes, you commit suicide, you are going straight to hell. I grew up with a lot of that language. I didn't grow up Catholic. I grew up in the Presbyterian Church, the PCA. Wonderful, wonderful things I can say about that upbringing. I can also say the community was legalistic, and what I understand led to a lot of pain and suffering in my life. And there were a lot of things that I thought, if I did this, I'm just going to hell. And so if I thought that, I didn't have a grasp on being justified. And I was in my 40s when I learned what it meant that I was justified. And I didn't even know what the word meant. I didn't even know that the Bible talked about it. But essentially, it's that what Christ has done on my behalf justifies me, gives me life in him, and nothing I do or I don't do takes that away.
So then it sounds like there was a point in your life, maybe a large chunk of your life, where you would have thought that what you're currently doing was wrong and sinful and evil, maybe.
Yeah.
And that
definitely.
transition happened. How old were you and how old were your kids when you were going through the transition from those two?
Well, it was a bottom out. And I had definitely questioned Christianity. I was on the fritz. Was about 40, maybe 39. But physically, I just wore myself out, and there were other things going on. My marriage was failing, our finances were in the dumps. And so I found a church. I hadn't been in church, did have my children baptized. We had been married by an Episcopal minister at a friend's home. So I kept like spiritual things in my life, but I questioned the faith. I questioned all sorts of things. But anyway, we had just moved to New York City. We'd been living out in Colorado. And so I said, one thing I'm going to do for my children is I'm going to find them a church, because my parents did that for me. I don't know what else to do. I think it's the right thing to do. So by circumstances, the Lord led me to this church that had a fantastic youth program. So I felt really good about it. And I liked the pastor. He was my age. I thought his sermons were not legalistic. So it seemed like a good fit. And so I found my way into his office and just shared with him a little bit of my despair. And instead of saying, well, go out and try a little bit harder.
Right.
Because that's often the answer.
That is the one. Yes. Have more faith, try harder, do better. He
said, well, this is like encouraging. So that he saw a bottom as encouraging. And then he explained to me that the very office I was sitting in has a lot of history in the 12-step movement, and that the Bill W. was ministered by the rector who had that office in the 1930s. And so I knew what the program was about, but I did not think all Christians should have anything to do with it, right? The whole legalism, questions about God as you understand him. And so I was a little bit wary, but this man met me with such grace and not with the law. And this pastor really met me in my life at just the right time, because he had his own experience with Christianity. He had been atheist, grew up as a kid, part of the altar team, always did everything right, went off to college, decided I don't want to be a Christian. And then he saw his grandfather after he died. I don't know if you've been around a person who was dead.
A lot. Yeah, as a pastor's kid, I went to a lot of funerals.
But there's something about, they're not there. Like, their body's there, but their personality, everything about them, it's not there. And so he felt that, and he's like, well, it's somewhere. So it sent him on, I guess, a new track to say, like, how can I believe? And what I really believe is that whether it's somebody in the 12-step program or if it's someone who was raised in a fundamentalist community, the gospel is there. And it's not necessarily the places we think we're going to go look for it. So anyway, I walked into that pastor's office. He met me in my low place with hope that this is actually a good place to be. There's not one more thing you need to do other than be right here. And that opened up a friendship, which opened up an opening into leading a ministry for him in his church, a healing ministry. And then a actual paid staff position opened up, and I got that job, and I started doing things with funerals. And then all of a sudden everyone was like, wow, she's really good around, dead people or family members that have lost someone or people who are dying. My dad was a physician, emergency room physician. So I grew up around death as a normal thing. So anyway, all of that just kind of started coming together. And then I learned about death doulas. Well, not only can we be servants to the dying, which the word doula is Greek for servant, we can actually talk about the really good news that Christ is going to return and make a new heaven and earth, and we're going to live in it.
Do you feel when you are assisting someone, I'm sorry, I don't know any of the terminology.
That's okay.
When you've got a client and they are coming to the end of their life, and they don't believe in God, do you have any of those, or do all the people that come to you, are they Christian because you're a Christian death
That's
doula?
a good question. Yeah, well, no, I've actually had one person who was not a believer, but it was a little bit of an interesting situation. The mother was dying. She did not want a doula. The daughter didn't have any siblings, had never married, needed support. So she actually hired 2 doulas. I lived in New York City at the time, and she hired 2 of us. And she was aware that I was a Christian, and she said she liked that. She didn't want, she said she's like, I'm familiar with some Christianity, but her mother was a Holocaust survivor, and they had Jewish roots, but didn't do any practicing with their faith at this time. But she did want to do she wanted to sit Shiva. She had some things she wanted to do. She was sort of interested in having a rabbi conduct a small ceremony, but she ended up not doing really anything other than a small online service because it was kind of at the tail end of lockdown. In New York, lockdown was pretty strict. So, but she asked me a couple questions about my faith. But it was not really a part of our work together. She wasn't really interested in religion at all. She just wanted the practical help and the support of 2 other ladies who were familiar with the death process. So that was the one that was, not a Christian family. People seek me out because I'm Christian.
Yeah. So then I would imagine there are some people who just want someone with them as they go through the process naturally, and there are other people who are wanting to jump to the end. Is that right?
Well, so when people are looking for a doula, and it's not that popular yet, it's more popular to train and be a death doula than it is to actually go out and hire one. I believe that will change.
Why do you think that is?
Well, the reason death doulas have become popular is that everyone, to train and be a part of a movement and hospice is very supportive of this movement as well, is because the COVID brought around this glaring realization that we don't want to talk about death. We're not ready for it. And there were already, I trained right before COVID started. So there were already a couple training programs, but I've watched, and myself included, because I built a training program for Christians after COVID. They've just totally expanded. You can get any kind of training program you want. They're all based on the same model of kind of a scope of practice that helps us get some liability insurance, but everybody has different gifts and different interests, and they may offer different things with their services. But at the bottom, there's a scope of practice that you stay with. But anyway, those who go into hospice very late don't have the good hospice experience you can have. So hospice is doing a huge thing trying to re-educate people that we don't come in and kill your families. They are actually, or your family member, they're actually dying. We offer comfort and support for them, for everybody, through, different people. You've got a nurse who can, administer the morphine. You've got, a doctor who calls in that order. You've got a social worker, a chaplain, a home health aide who comes in and helps with bathing. So all of this support is intended for the dying person and the family. So a lot of people, though, they don't want hospice. They think, oh my gosh, they're going to put my mom or my dad on morphine and then they're going to die. And so there's just a lot of misconceptions around it. So there's this re-education going on. Death doulas are a part of that re-education.
Are people and going through the process naturally? And how many of them are like taking some kind of medication or something to intentionally end their life?
Oh, well, so medical aid in dying, I can't give you the exact number, but so it started in Oregon. And I want to say it's in the few thousands, at least the last report that I read, of people who have actually used the medical aid in dying in Oregon. So we're not up into like hundreds of thousands of people are doing this. And a lot of people who say they support it, and they may even be given the medical aid in dying prescription, like they want to have it in their home in case they need it. Not everybody takes it. And not everyone who votes that they want or who supports that they want the people who live in their communities to have access to it actually would take it themselves. I'm not in a medical aid in dying state. You can only have access if you're in a terminal illness. You have a terminal illness. You're in hospice. You can request it. You have to take like a test to make sure you're not depressed.
How are you not depressed? Like, isn't everybody who is at that point pretty?
Yeah.
I know one person. Well, I probably know more than that, but I know of one person that I know for sure they ended their life they had a terminal illness, and it was an extremely thought out and extremely responsible process. It wasn't just like, oh, I've got a lot of pain today, so like they scheduled and like rescheduled and had their family come over, and like it was like it seemed extremely not impulsive. There was a lot of depression throughout that whole family, as there should be. It seems like if you're in that much pain. So I don't understand a depression test for someone who's in that situation.
I don't either. I mean, I have not, I'm not in a state that, has this access, but I'm also not like, in my work as a death doula, I am not going to pick up that mantle as an advocate. If I did live in a state that allowed it and someone came to me and asked if I would be their doula because this is what they want to do, I would probably say I'm not the best choice for you. I did receive a call from somebody when I was in New York before the law passed, but they wanted to end their life with voluntary stopping eating and drinking. It's called VSED. And it's a tool that someone on hospice may use. A part of stopping eating, drinking happens naturally with the end of life process.
Right.
But to voluntarily do it, that would be involuntary, right? Just the body shutting down and the metabolism is slowing and the swallowing mechanism is one of the things that begins not to work so well when, death is very close. But this person was not dying of a terminal illness. I could tell this person was depressed. And so they were hoping to hire me as a doula to sit with them while they did voluntary stopping eating and drinking, which you should not be alone when you do that because you don't have any fluids and food in your body. And if you need to get up and, something like that, or you need the support that even though you're hungry and thirsty, you've really told yourself, this is what I want to do. And so, you're not going to allow me to have the food and the liquid. And I declined that case. That would be very unethical, I believe. Doulas are new enough to the scene as in the end of life field that a lot of these, there's no regulation. There's absolutely no regulation around it. But I would think that would get you into some hot water and unethical, and I wouldn't go there.
So then, if I understand you correctly, none of your clients are actively trying to die. Is that right?
No. My clients have all died in the middle of the night, and I have not been asked to be there in the middle of the night. Typically what happens is I'm there, and then when death is coming within a day or so. They call it the death rattle. There are signs, right? One of them is, because I've said the swallowing is beginning to slow down. And so, naturally we produce saliva and it's not moving down as it should. And so a rattle begins to happen, or like a kind of a raspy breathing. And then there's modeling of the hands. There's things that you can begin to see. Not getting out of bed. They're sleeping all the time. There's certain signs, right? So, okay, well, the person's probably going to die. And hospice, at that point, hospice is coming more regularly and checking in on these things. So the doula is not the only person there looking at the family members and saying, it looks like you got a few hours left. So typically what I do is I help people prepare for that little bit of time, and then I go home. And then I usually get a call at, 4:00 in the morning or 6:00. And they're like, you're not going to believe it, but my mom died last night. It's always surprising. And even when
To you or just to them?
To them. Even
Yeah.
when, like, it's shocking that when that person is not there anymore. And so then I offer the family the next day when they call me, do you want me to come over? And I get mixed on that. Sometimes they say yes. Sometimes they say, you know what, we really just want to be here with my mom or my dad. We're doing okay. So sometimes my work is, it just depends what someone needs. Like, I am there not to overburden a family. I'm there to actually give them support. And if me being there in the middle of the nights what they need, I'd be happy to do it. If going home and being on call is there, and if they want me to come by the next day, I will. If not, I won't. Right. And so, yeah.
In most cases, what would you say the percentage of your attention or energy is benefiting the person who's dying, and how much of it is benefiting the
Great
family?
question. Very great question. It's usually 50-50. Yeah.
And what percent of the time that you spend and the energy is pre and post death?
That's a great question. Mostly pre-death. Of the couple families I have helped with funeral planning, I mean, one, I kind of like ran. Even though there's a pastor, I was the main liaison between the family, the pastor, a lot of the community members. And I even did like AV things, which is like really my specialty. But you know what? Sometimes
Practical needs. Yeah.
practical need. I was just so you do what's needed. An extra hand is great. So, and the nice thing is when you're accustomed to being around death, which I am, you're not panicked, right? And so a non-panic person is always really helpful in a situation that can bring up panic. But typically it's before death. And so how I kind of see my work go is that someone calls me and says, terminal illness, or my friend or my husband has a terminal illness. We're interested in hiring someone to come in and do this with us. And I'm like, okay, that's great. Well, let's set up a time. And so I meet with them. We talk a little bit more about what their needs are, what I do. We make an agreement of what it's going to look like to the best imagination that we have, because you don't know exactly what is going to happen. And so if it's 3 months out from about 3 months, they're just starting hospice care, and they're just entering into that, and maybe it's going to be 3-4 months, my visits won't be so frequent. It depends. If they want to do a legacy project, I can come more often and help with that. If they really just need someone checking in on them once a week, how are you doing? Let me come pray with you. Let me come help you around the house, give you a little respite. And then as time builds up, I'll start to visit more frequently and more frequently. And, sometimes people get a little agitated with me because they know the more I'm coming around, the closer it is to death. But there's a lot going on in that time frame, because we can't help but deny death. I think the person that's dying and the person who, or the people that are around it. And when someone like gets out of bed one day and gets maybe to the couch with help, or gets to the bathroom with help, and then the next day they don't have the energy to do that, that's like shocking, right? That says something loud and clear. And it could be that they're having a bad day and the next day they are able to. But as these changes move forward, it's really disconcerting for everybody. And so a doula is a wonderful person in that space to just help everybody emotionally navigate the road ahead.
So for a lot of people that I've seen who have had someone who's terminally ill and then they pass, right after there's obviously this huge gap. You had your life dedicated to this thing that no longer requires you, and that was your meaning, and it was a misery, but it was also your meaning, and now you're left with misery and no meaning. Is that state within your expertise? Is that also end-of-life doula stuff?
The grief support. Yeah.
How long does that last?
Well, I mean, I'm like for hire, right? So people can have me around for 6 years if they want,
Sure.
But,
Honestly, that doesn't sound like very long at all. I mean, like 6 years after someone has passed, it should still leave a mark, it seems like.
It's very true. I mean, so one of the things I love to say about doulas is that, like, when I look at what's the value, right? Why? I mean, especially if you're paying somebody to come into your home, what is the value? You've got to find that there's a value proposition to have somebody in your home and helping you with this. And there's a lot of expenses at the end of life that are stressful. So you want to think, am I going to rack up, $1,000 bill with this lady and I didn't feel like it was worth it? You really want to consider what you're doing. And so I I do talk with people of, what value we're going to get from having me. And one of them is that once hospice leaves, because I'm not regulated by insurance like hospice care is, I can still be available. Hospice will call you and check in, and there are definitely some bereavement services that are great. But you can have your doula who walked that entire journey with you, hopefully, still checking in. Or even, I was just my mom, for instance. I was a doula on her behalf, but I was also her daughter. Bill pay. I mean, she had never paid the bills. I mean, there's things that we don't think about sometimes with widows is that, somebody has been married for 55, 60 years, and likely, particularly in generations before us, one partner really did one thing and one was really in charge of another. Let's say maybe it was laundry, right? And someone's like, I've never run this washer before in our life. There's just a lot of practical things that can fall through the cracks. And, your adult children may come in for a week or two, but they have to get back to work and to sports with their kids. And so maybe they don't live in the neighborhood, having a doula who can be a part of that transition is really, really important.
It seems like there's also a certain amount of like, I should be able to do this. Like, not only like, do I not want to bother anybody? Like, I should be a self-sufficient human. And so it's at least embarrassing, if not worse, that like I'm having a hard time living life when just a second ago I was living my life and taking care of this other person. Like I was doing more, and now I'm responsible for less, and yet I feel incapable to do it. So for some of the people I've seen, there's just that like, surely this is my job. Surely I should be able to take care of this.
I think a lot of people think that way, or that there's something wrong with them because they are still suffering from grief. Months, years later, again, just using the personal example of my mom, she's like, I don't even remember the first 2 years after my dad died. Did you really move here? I'm like, yes, I did. Or she'll say, did we really do that? I'm like, we did. And then, she'll say, now I'm really grieving. And I'm like, well, I think you were really grieving. You just don't remember. It's a long, long road.
What are some of the most common conversations you have with someone in their last days?
Well, since I primarily have worked with Christians, faith, regret, shame, so these kind of conversations with the woman, that had the daughter, our conversations were about hope. And she said, I just don't want to go through the dying process. Like if I could just go immediately. And so we had really, really good conversations, really meaningful, a lot of prayer time. And then this woman who just died of 99 years old, just declined with age. Her hearing was pretty much gone, or, she needed help to do anything. Vision wasn't good. There was a pastor she loved. And we, every time I sat with her, we just read from his devotion book and talked about what the message was. And her thing was like, she was ready, but very like, just, I can't imagine what it's going to be like to actually die and not be here. And so that gave her a little bit of fear. So just working through that, reading the promises of scripture was what I did with her. And then another lovely man, he never entered hospice. He died in the hospital with an infection. He was having like just constant transfusions, and then he ended up getting an infection. And so he was undergoing cancer treatments. The doctor was saying to him, I got more tricks up my sleeve, big prayer chains at church. I was the last one from the church to actually see him. And I didn't go by thinking that this is the last I'm going to see you, because the doctor kept saying, we got it. I am seeing the tumor shrink. And so the day that I went to see him, it was freezing out. And I had walked over to the hospital because it was a good, like, mile, brisk walk. I was like, I need some exercise. I was freezing. So I stopped in the bodega, which is a little corner store, grabbed a tea, and I don't know, it was $1.50. And they said it had to be $3 to use my debit card. So I grabbed a thing of shortbread and threw it in my purse. Like, literally was not thinking that, other than I need the tea. I got to use my debit card. And so I went up into his room, and he was not eating anymore. But I said, oh my gosh, I have shortbread in my bag. And he like ate the teeniest nibble, all that. And then he died. And I like got the call the next morning. Like, he died last night. And so I was telling one of the pastors about it. And she said, well, it's almost like you gave him communion. And so just that to me was like, oh my gosh, like I didn't even plan that. I didn't orchestrate it. I know it wasn't, consecrated, but there was meaning behind it, right? For both of us. And so the end of life conversations, they're meaningful. They're meaningful with the people that aren't dying, but that are in the room. People say, I don't know what to say, and I've been told by dying people, please ask my visitors not to ask me any questions because I'm tired. And people, they don't know what to say. And they're like, well, what are you doing? How are you feeling? And, it's not bad to ask questions, but it's dawned on me that's the time for them to come in. They don't need to ask, they don't need a response, but to say, you made such an impact in my life. And so I've been able to like help people understand how to be around someone who's dying. And I think it's just there's healing that can happen in that moment.
So much of our conversation is performative, and it's like the question about like, how are you? Well, I'm terrible. Like, but that's not an acceptable answer. Like, we just want to keep asking until we get the answer, I'm good, or I'm better, or something's sunny, something's rosy. And we are terrible at dealing with the truth when it's dark. And I don't think we have enough synonyms for the word beautiful. But if there is anything that is, in James's version of Christianity, it's looking after orphans and widows. And I think the dying would be in there of like, this is what it really means to take care of someone who is helpless or needs someone the most. And so there's something definitely beautiful about that work in that time, in that sacred space. So I appreciate the work that you're doing.
Yeah.
As one last question, what do you think is the most misunderstood thing about your profession? What do you wish people knew about what you do that you think they don't understand?
Yeah, actually, I would say it's to the church, to the institutional church is, I get some pushback a little bit. Oh, wow, what you do is great. But, we have things under control, where I really believe that there's nothing more amazing than someone who's trained in the end of life process and what I think is very solid biblical theology that could be a supplement inside of your volunteers, inside of your ministry, to actually minister to the families, minister to the community. Once someone dies, like they're not here. Well, they were here last Sunday and then they're not here anymore. You have the funeral and you talk about it, but you kind of move on. And then another person comes in and sits in their pew. But like that person, it takes a lot more time than that to process it, right? So I think doulas inside of church communities is a given. So I think that if I could have it most understood is that we're not a challenge to anything, right? We are like a supplement to bring care and compassion in addition to what the church already offers, educating people on like dying in America is actually not that easy. There's so many regulations around hospice care and the expenses that are involved, and doulas are trained in that and they understand that. And if like we are promised by Christ that there is going to be trial. We know that. And so I see the end of life process it is a trial. It is. There's so many aspects of it that become difficult beyond just grief, but then they, end up adding to the grief that if we know as Christians that Christ is like God has made a way in Christ, he's going to make a way through this too. But you need that minister to you. Sometimes every moment. Like when I'm in a hardship, I don't have an end of life, the terminal diagnosis. Nobody in my immediate family does at this time, but I have other real stresses. And I need someone like every minute to minister to me. It's sometimes that God's made a way. He will continue to make a way. And so I just think we need that in our churches. The baby boomer generation is large. So, a lot more people are going to be dying in the years to come. And so really just putting together a team in your church, considering training someone for that is just invaluable.
We all have a terminal diagnosis, and
we do.
It's really uncomfortable to say it and dark, and you're not supposed to say that because that's not happy or kind or nice.
Right.
But I feel like that spending more time thinking about end of life in many ways would improve the time that we have on the planet. So
absolutely.
Thanks again for what you're doing.
And so what thing I do, if anybody is, watching this and considering learning more, yes, you can do that through my links. And within those links, there's information. I do a weekly gathering. You don't have to be a believer. You can be, agnostic, you were in the church and you were disenchanted, you could just be merely curious, whatever it may be. You don't have to have any biblical knowledge, but we meet weekly. We talk about resurrection. We talk about like fear of death, talk about any of those things. And we're studying a book within that called Surprised by Hope. And it is looking at the New Testament's revelation that Christ is going to return. There will be a new heaven and a new earth. There won't be a rapture. The Christians are just going to disappear. Christ is going to come back. He's going to raise the dead. There will be a new heaven and new earth. And that actually impacts how we live now, how we serve.
That's a beautiful vision. Thank you.
You're welcome. Thank you.
Thank you all for joining me. Hopefully that was perspective widening for you. And hopefully you can tell that I put considerable effort into this to give it to you for free. And so now it's your turn. Click a couple buttons and give me something for free so we can keep this good thing going. For all you crazy, wacky super fans who are already on Team Possibly Wrong, make sure you check out the link in the description for more free ways to show your support and keep this love train rolling. Be well, everyone. I'm rooting for you.